I don't think Edgar Degas killed all 5 of the canonical victims of Jack the Ripper, because I don't think one person killed all 5 canonical victims of Jack the Ripper, and I'm not alone in this. The more that you research, or that you read the forums, the less likely you are to believe that they were all committed by a single person. Just the MOs are wildly different. The timing is different. For example, 4 of the murders are clustered into a single month, and then there's a 5-week lapse before Mary Jane Kelly is killed. But then if you reduce it to timing alone, you should probably cluster in Martha Tabram, who was murdered only a few days before the first canonical victim. But that MO doesn't match at all because her throat wasn't even slit. There is so much information and so many different murders to narrow this down from, and it's really invaluable to have the online resource of all these experts to check my suppositions. Because after all, if I'm just looking for the murders that Degas and Sickert were most likely to do in tandem together, then I would definitely cherry pick Martha Tabram's murder, the double homicide evening, and then also Mary Jane Kelly's death. Martha Tabram was killed on the 7th of August, and she was stabbed repeatedly to death. But again, if I were cherry-picking victims, she would be perfect because she was last seen with another woman and 2 men dressed as soldiers. Each woman went down a separate street with their man. Pearlie Paul and her soldier chose Angel Street. Martha Tabram and her murderer ended up in George's yard. A police officer witnessed a soldier waiting outside of George's yard he said he was waiting on his mate. Pearlie Paul Connolly did later try to identify the 2 soldiers involved, but she failed to do so. Everyone that she did identify was a false positive. They had airtight alibis and could not have been at the scene. The 2 ranks of these soldiers were private and corporal, meaning that there was a slight age difference in between the 2 men. This is Walter Sickert in 1884, 4 years before Martha Tabram's murder. He would have passed for a soldier. This is Degas and Sickert, I believe in 1886. Does this man look like he's a soldier age? I don't know. If I were trying to make Martha Tabram's murder the first murder that these 2 men committed in tandem, there are things that make it attractive to choose. For example, there were 2 murder weapons used. So I could say that the more experienced murderer, Degas, came and did the murderous stabbings. So when Sickert returned to find out what was taking Degas so long, and Degas discovered that Sickert hadn't actually killed his lady, then perhaps he forced Sickert to also stab Martha's body so that they would both be guilty of this one murder. That would be a way to force this situation to work if I were totally obsessed and had no reality checks. But that's so much supposition I'm uncomfortable making it. That's just an aside. The double event night is the 2nd and 3rd of the 4 murders that I would pin upon the 2 of them if I had no reality checks. This is the night that both Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered. Most important to my theory, Catherine Eddowes' apron was found under the Golston Street graffito, and Elizabeth Stride was murdered outside of a socialist meeting. Both things that looked like they were trying to pin these murders on Jewish people. Degas was a known anti-Semite. Also that evening there was a witness to the murders. He saw a woman being attacked, and alarmed, he crossed the street to avoid the aggression, at which point the aggressor yelled out Lipsky, because the witness's name was Israel Schwartz, which means that to this day, interpreting the Lipsky call-out is incredibly difficult. Lipsky was a known murderer of women, and Israel Schwartz was visibly Jewish. So was the murderer calling out an insult toward the Jewish man? Was he proclaiming that he was about to Lipsky the woman that he was attacking? Was he warning the man across the street that Schwartz was a Jew and should be followed? Was the man smoking a pipe also Jewish and also running from the man when he heard Lipsky being called out? The whole thing's pretty confusing, but it is definitely some sort of anti-Semitism going on right there. That whole neighborhood was just filled with anti-Semitic riots and demonstrations at the time. The leather apron was thought to be Jewish. The leather apron being the primary suspect of the Jack the Ripper murders at the time, because he was a man seen wandering around the neighborhood in a bloody leather apron due to his job. His name was John Pfizer. He was apprehended, and he had an airtight alibi. He was not the killer. That didn't stop people from latching on to the idea that the murderer could be a Jewish man. I personally believe that the Golston Street graffito and the placement of Elizabeth Stride's body outside of the socialist meeting that was mostly attended by Jews, both of these things were attempts to inflame the anti-Semitic feelings in the time. By the way, sorry that my brain's all jumbled. I'm actually pretty sick today. The fourth murder that I would pin on both men together is Mary Jane Kelly's death. There is a part of me that still very much believes that she could be this girl. The model for Degas' Little Dancer, her name was Marie von Gotham, and she was last seen in history in 1883, I believe. The very first historical records that we have of Mary Jane Kelly are in 1884. Anything that we know about her life prior to that time is just supposition. It's the stories that she told people and that people recited after her death. We have no documentation of the life of Mary Jane Kelly prior to 1884, and some of the documents that should exist for a woman born in this region do not exist. Mary Jane Kelly, who was supposed to be Irish, had also adopted a French name. And Marie von Gotham was not originally French, she was Dutch. So it's quite likely that she spoke more than one language, even at that age. These two men first really hit it off in 1883, and in 1888, Degas finished very few paintings. Patricia Cornwell, in her book accusing Sickert of being Jack the Ripper, establishes that this man had some free time in 1888. And also that he had numerous apartments around London, some of them in the seedier neighborhoods, like Whitechapel. And while Sickert never admitted to being Jack the Ripper, he did say that he knew the identity of Jack the Ripper and that he had rented him a room. So is it possible that he allowed Degas to stay in his apartments when they were on their killing spree? Again, that's still supposition. The truth is, I still have a lot of work ahead of me, and I'm continuing to do research, but I thought I would let you know that I also hope to be putting out a YouTube video sometime this week that's just a longer version of some of the stuff that I've been talking on here in a very disjointed manner. I kind of hope to put it together in a more easy to follow manner, because I'd be curious to see which of the murders you think Degas is most likely to have done. I am beginning to think that maybe he only committed the final murder, which is unfortunate because the anti-Semitic tie-in that I keep finding between Jack the Ripper and Edgar Degas then gets thrown out the window. So if you have any advice of things I should read or look up or look into, please leave them in the comments or share this with somebody who knows more about the topic than you do. Thank you so much. I appreciate your help. And also, of course, thanks for sticking around through this long video as I sit in the parking lot of Urgent